NFL, and I'm here to talk about an event I attended on Thursday, a behind the scenes look at the Washington Commanders rebrand process. Let's get it on. What's up, y'all? Thank you for spending your Saturday morning with me today. I'm here to talk about an event I went to on Thursday, the Washington Commanders rebrand process. It was an all access event for Washington Gold members. And honestly, guys, it's a really cool time. So I felt like just going to the event, getting all this great information, I wanted to share it with you. And a lot of people have been asking. Just generally speaking, my big takeaways was Jason Wright is the real deal. I really enjoyed his presentation. He hosted the event with two other hosts that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And there was kind of a real cool analytical, like marketing, big business presentation. And I just found it really interesting. So let's get right into it. So, guys, on Thursday, I went to this event, had a really good time behind the scenes for the Washington Commanders rebrand All Access. It was about an hour long. It started around 6:30. It ended around 8:15. It was a little bit longer than an hour. But basically, it was a really cool behind the scenes look about how Washington became the Washington Commanders, what the process was, how it all went down. It was actually really interesting. A lot of people were invited. I'd say about maybe 200 people were there. It was in the EA Sports Lounge on the club level in FedEx Field, if you guys know what I'm talking about. And when we got there are basically three hosts. David Baldwin, he was a chief ticketing officer. So if you guys aren't familiar, the Washington Gold members are basically the season ticket holders. So if you take the business exclusive package as one of the three entertainment packages for the season ticket holders, you're invited to this event. The main host was Jason Wright. He was the main focal point of the conversation. But I really liked what Will Misselbrook had to say. So Will Misselbrook, he is a guy brought in by Jason Wright. He's a chief creative director and digital officer, and he was the guy behind the curtains for the Washington Commanders rebrand process. And he did all the analytics, he did all the marketing, he did the big rollout, and he just was a very intelligent and very sharp guy. It was really cool just kind of seeing how they all worked off each other and how they came up with their great ideas. So it was a really cool event, and we're gonna go and talk about it. So like I said, we came in around 6:30, pretty small, kind of cozy room. Basically, we're all kind of having a conversation in regard to the event. They kind of jumped into it and talked about how the event and how the Washington Commanders came into be. It discussed the vision. Some things you may have heard already, but things I found pretty interesting was there was 40,000 applications for the Washington Redskins replacement name from all walks of life. Basically, the whole process, how it started, is every single application was actually seriously considered, and 40,000 of them were put into a spreadsheet and personally vetted by Dan Snyder, Tanya Snyder, and Jason Wright, which I found pretty interesting. Jason Wright was pretty candid. He's like, there were some pretty offensive, pretty like digs at Dan Snyder's into the actual name selections. There's some silly ones of the Washington Apples for George Washington and things like that. And what they did officially was they basically looked at the 40,000 first wave, things that were immediately inappropriate. They got rid of all those names. Second wave, any names that could potentially have any trademark issues, and they kind of like cut it all down to about 100 potential names that the Washington Commanders could actually become. One thing that I found pretty interesting was the Warriors was a hot topic. I know if you guys have been following the Redskins, the Commanders, Dan Snyder for a long time. The Washington Warriors has always been near and dear to Dan Snyder's heart. He actually owned a semi-pro football league based on the Washington Warriors. He really wanted that team name to keep going. And Jason Wright went out to go talk to various people, including indigenous tribes and Native American tribes, about the Washington Warriors name. It was really interesting because going and talking to the Native American groups, Washington Warriors was an adamant no. People in those tribes, in those groups, just felt that even though it was offensive, it kind of, even though it didn't necessarily connect and officially have ties to Native American groups, they just felt that there was potential for it to be offensive. It didn't feel right to Native American groups. Jason Wright mentioned it. He's like, you know what? Is it fair to have a monopoly on the warrior's name? Warriors could be some sort of Spartan warrior, it can be a military warrior. Can we potentially kind of go that route? And then it was really cool. In a point of like transparency, Jason Wright was like something resonated with him. And a Native American tribe member talked to him. He's like, Mr. Wright, you're bringing good points, and you are right. You're correct. We cannot monopolize the name, but sometimes there's the right thing to do, and then there's the dead right thing to do. So you can go along with the Washington Warriors, but some of us are going to still feel uncomfortable. Like we're not going to feel right with that name. So we would appreciate it if you don't go that name. And I think that resonated with Mr. Wright because he was like, you know what? The whole point of this is to be inclusive, is to listen to people. And we are talking about bringing Native Americans and not offending them. So therefore, what are we really doing right now, right? So we're basically going to have to not be Washington Warriors and go a different direction with it. So even though that was a popular name, it was something that he was interested in his heart, he decided to go a different direction, which I do respect and I appreciate. Um, we asked him, the conversation came up, what was your personal favorite names? And the hog farmer is going to appreciate this. Some of the fan base is going to appreciate it. He said the Washington Hogs was his favorite names, and Washington Red Hogs was really interesting in him. But it just didn't poll well with females in regard to merchandise, in regard to dress and clothes. Female just kind of felt inappropriate. It felt like it wasn't very, wasn't really attractive for them. They weren't really into the whole hog paraphernalia, hog memorabilia, actually. So he wasn't really too keen into that. The topic Red Wolves came up as well. Red Wolves was definitely considered. However, as we talked about in regard to the Wolves trademark, the icon, the logo, the branding, the nicknames, there were just so many Wolf teams in regard to the collegiate game and the pro game that every little nuance that they would try to do was going to get caught up in litigation. So they're like, you know what? That's not something we're going to step into every single year for the next 20, 30 years. We can't even, like, it's going to limit our creativity in regard to becoming a Wolf like variant. So therefore, we're not going to go that route. So that's what eventually eliminated Red Wolves. Another thing that I found was pretty interesting about the whole presentation is that they reached out to the Cleveland Indians, the Cleveland Guardians now about this whole rebrand process because they had something similar. They had something in common in regard to having a rebrand, having to change, going from a potentially offensive name to more of a accepted public, widely accepted public name. Um, Maybe I shouldn't be going this route, but Jason Wright was like, we talked to them early on in the process, but as time went on, we realized that we had different visions and perspectives on how we're going to roll things out. Cleveland's vision, their perspective on how they were going to rebrand was just to rip the band-aid off, just to do it quickly, and it's to go with the Guardian's name, just kind of like, keep it similar, keep the font similar, just kind of do it quickly, just to kind of get it over with, right? But essentially, they saw the reviews, they kind of saw the analytics, the data behind the acceptance of the Guardians, and that they felt that that wasn't the direction they wanted to go. So even though we had that long, drawn out 2-year process for finding the correct name for the Washington Commanders or to finding the appropriate name, essentially they're like, you know what, we're going to pull, we're going to roll it out, we're going to frame it well on 2222, which is like an iconic number, it's going to stand out a little bit. We're going to go that direction in regard to the branding. What was cool about the event, the content creator, the creative director, just talked about how it was just anxiety and excitement on the day of 2222 and releasing the name, and how it had to be perfect. Basically, they had all the legal, things in place, all the structures in place in regard to social media, in regard to the lighting, in regard to having the alumni out in the public. Excuse me, and they wanted to do that within a minute of actually releasing the name on the Good Morning America show. So it's really cool. Everything was ready to go. Craig Melvin announced it with Doug Williams and Jonathan Allen live, and then within a minute, all publication, all sales were up on the web pages, and it had to be done just right in order for it to be an effective rollout. What I found was pretty interesting is comparing apples to apples, the Guardians' name change to the Commanders' name change. The Commanders, it exploded. There's 89 billion eyes on this in regard to social media across all social media platforms. The Washington Commanders name change was iconic. It was very, very large. It was seen around the world, and it was a very big deal. Um, Basically, going into that, they talked about how, you know, in order for it to be an authentic experience, it had to be intertwined with DC. So, and not just having a name just kind of drop onto a web page and enter the inner, an inner space never seen again. They wanted to be iconic. They wanted to be, building a community. Jason Wright talked about how, in the 80s and the 70s, football players would go to your local grocery store. They would go to your local mall. They would just be right there in front of you, and you need to interact with them. And their kids would be on your kids' sports teams and so on and so forth. He felt like that intertwine of like basically fandom in regard to players and having that community is something that he wants to build in DC. I'm not sure if you guys saw it the other day, but there actually was a rookie luncheon, rookie alumni luncheon. Tim Hightower's doing an excellent job with alumni relations, and essentially, the a vision. We'll see if it actually gets there, but the vision for the Commanders right now is building a program where if you come to Washington D.C., if you come to the Commanders, you're part of a program. You're part of something that's going to develop and going to continue for years and years. You're not a rental as a pro. You're going to be coming. You're going to be well insulated and protected. So going back to insulation, going back to being part of the community, it was very important to build the alumni. It was very important to shoot the Commanders logo on the dwarf, down in Union Station. Having alumni and the cars going out, giving out products to being on, feet on the ground to get the name excited and get the product out there because it felt more authentic to do so. So that goes back to the main point. Where does Commanders come from? Why Commanders out of all names in the world, right? So when they pulled really early on in regard to values that people in Washington, D.C. and the DMV felt was very important for them, four words really stood out to them. It was grit, strength, power, and service, right? And it was actually pretty cool. Jason Wright was like, hey, everybody in the room, raise your hand if you actually work for the government, or raise your hand if you have a military connection. And across the board, everyone's raising their hands. I'll say about 50, 60% of the room actually rose their hands. And it's like, that's why we chose Commanders, right? We did it for you. Like that's in the fabric of DC. In regard to the Commanders, we are in capturing all of that grit, strength, power, and service. Like the Washington DC is a community of servants, right? We serve our community in regard to protection. We serve our community in regard to, lawmaking, things like that, teachers, educators, things of that nature. The Commanders and captures what DC is all about. We are here to steward and protection and protect our community and protect around the world. So the Commanders is the most natural name. He admitted that obviously whatever name that they actually selected was going to have bad results. So their market strategy was to break even in regard to popularity by in 12 months, right? So, if you poll like, Washington Redskins, you like the Commanders getting about 20%, 25%, like, oh, I hate the name, so on and so forth. Their goal was to actually reach about 50% within 1 year. So we're a couple months into it. We're about 4 months into this whole rebrand process. I think the fan base is starting to become more comfortable with it. Obviously, there's a lot of negativity still going around it, which is perfectly understandable. But we'll see in 2/2/23. We'll see if the actual Commander's name does have a positive energy, or at least a even keel in regard to acceptance across the board. As we saw, one cool thing about the event was you could actually see the jerseys up close in person. There was the white jerseys, the burgundy jerseys, the black jerseys as well. And it was really cool. They actually broke down what every jersey was all about as well at the process, right? So for one, they talked about the white jersey that actually was on the podium. And as you guys know, the white jersey is the most polarizing of all the jerseys that are out, right? So for one, the burgundy jersey, that burgundy and gold, that tradition, essentially the vision for all the content creators and for Jason Wright was essentially that burgundy jersey is good. That's the jersey that's iconic. That's going to maintain tradition in Washington, D.C. That's our home jersey. That's what we're about. Burgundy gold, Washington, D.C., right? The whole vision of the Commanders is to steward and bring in a new fan base because, as we know, guys, the fan base has been kind of deteriorating over the years. The team has been in, has seen some better days. There's been some rough things going on over the past 22 years in regard to DC. So they want to actually maintain tradition, but kind of bring in the new future, right? So Jason actually got off this chair. He walked over, kind of talked about the jersey, and went through it step by step. Right? He's like, the burgundy jersey regards tradition. The white jersey is supposed to represent like forward thinking, like new concepts, clean lines, speed. And it's talked about as you guys probably know by now, the side sleeves and this and the actual diamonds in the number represents the actual iconic shape of Washington D.C. They talked about Benjamin Banneker being an African American designer in regard to how he designed and kind of laid out Washington D.C. and how that actually kind of intertwines the diversity that Washington D.C. has. So that's what the whole variation, that whole diamond pattern that we see that some people kind of find polarizing. I find it interesting. I think it's pretty cool that they're doing this, but I actually kind of like the white jerseys. But what I found out was interesting from the presentation is that they are going to actually mix and match pants. Jason writes like, "Hey, by far my favorite combination is the burgundy pants with the white jerseys. Wear that every single week," is what he said. I love it. Wear it every single week. It's fantastic. I'm looking forward to that too. I know they're going to wear black pants with the white jerseys as well, which will be pretty cool to see. I know the black outlining was actually kind of controversial to our fan base as well. Jason talked about that and about how the NFL is so meticulous in regard to having like different jersey combinations that there has to be in your prime. If you want to have an alternate jersey, there has to be color in your primary jersey that kind of connects the two. So they had a little They had this is like the third or fourth version of the white jersey, and like NFL kept on sending it back. There's not enough black. There's not enough black. I need more black in the white jersey in order to have that black alternate. So Jason got garnered feedback from the fan base. They wanted a black jersey. In order to do that, they had to do that on the white jersey because they wanted to leave a traditional burgundy and gold alone. Therefore, the black lines in the white jerseys. I think they're pretty cool. My favorite color is black. I'm not opposed to it, but that's where the whole polarizing concept comes. Cool things that they were talking about is that basically the jerseys are going to, well, what I found interesting is that they have to keep these jerseys for 3 years. That's the new rule for the NFL. They kind of have to keep it for 3 years. They did talk about how a fourth jersey is coming. There is going to be a lot of feedback and a lot of fan engagement over the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, maybe the next year or so in regard to the actual jersey rollout. The fourth jersey is going to be a lot of fan incorporation, a lot of feedback from the fans because they're allowed to have that. Um, I don't know. I kind of suspect that like the 90th anniversary game we might actually see, which is this year, of the 90th anniversary of the Washington franchise. I feel like they would actually roll out the fourth jersey there, but it might be too quick of a turnaround in regard to bringing that out. But they are going to garner feedback, and I wouldn't be surprised if it has a really traditional feel, or maybe even have the mascot that they're talking about. And to kind of bring closure on this podcast is that he did talk about that. He said moving forward, there is going to be a new fight song. It's going to be debuted the first week. The band's coming back. We are going to do a mascot. We find that a mascot's very, very important. He touched on the fact that people become fans in the most obscure random ways, right? You pick up a football card and you love the color of that card, or you go to the store and you try to buy a lunchbox and it's the last lunchbox left, and it just happens to be the Washington Redskins or Washington Commanders or whatever it is, right? And he says that little early interaction you have as a young kid makes you a fan for life. So he does find it uber important to actually become to have a mascot to connect the younger generation with the team. So there's going to be a year-long process in regard to fan engagement, in regard to garnering feedback for what the mascots could be. I he fan It was all the fans in the room and him on stage just talked about how they love the helmet and how basically it's iconic. I don't see the mascot potentially getting on the uniform, maybe 3 years from now when that policy does change. But I do think that the mascot's coming at the end of the year. I'll be very, very surprised if it's not a hog. I feel like it's definitely the direction it's going to go. Jason was kind of appeasing the crowd. To, I like the hogs as a name, and the crowd was kind of cheering there too. It just seems like it makes too much sense for it to happen. All right, finally to bring it on home, right? My overall perception of the event was awesome, man. I went to another event early in the week. There was a Ron Rivera presentation on Tuesday in regard to garnering more season ticket holders for Washington, and basically that was cool. That was cool. It was fun, but it kind of felt like a timeshares pitch where they're like, "Hey, we're going to beat Dallas, and hey, root for us, and we got to fill the stands up." Kind of felt kind of like inauthentic on that Ron Rivera presentation on Tuesday. This is real cool, man. That was a really cool behind the scenes look at the branding, the marketing, the research. And it was, I think they were going to open up a question and answer session that was actually on the agenda. But unfortunately, this was a day after the Jack Del Rio event and the whole comments that he had. So I think they kind of backed away from that and made the presentation longer. But the most impressive thing that I took away from it is Jason Wright, man, I do think he's the man for the job. I think he's very effusive. He commands the room. He is very intelligent. And for 45 minutes after the presentation, even longer because I was there for 45 minutes and there's plenty of people behind me. He was answering questions, shaking hands, taking pictures, and kind of talking about, doing everything right. I was talking to him like, hey, thank you for listening to me and thank you for having conversations on Twitter. There are people complaining about the club seats and like, I don't want a yellow seat. Why are they inconsistent on the second level? And like, he was listening to that. He was receptive to that. He was definitely down to earth and hugging people. And, some people were getting, some ladies were getting a little bit too close with him, kind of flirting with him and stuff too. And he was just doing his thing. He's kind of, being mature about it and cool. He's a laid back, down to earth dude. So I definitely respect his concepts. To bring it on home, one last thing, going back to the branding, we talked about Red Wolves, Warriors, so on and so forth. Um, Going back over here, let me go one more thing. Will basically just talked about how Commanders, that name just kind of is lends itself very well to branding. Like take command the community, command our history, just things like that. That framework, that base, essentially, is a good way to kind of target and market moving forward. So I do like how that kind of was framed as well. But altogether, great process. I thought it was very interesting. Hopefully I answered most of your questions in here. If I didn't, hit me up in the chat, hit me up on Twitter at gcarmi21. I'm more than welcome to answer anything that I can. It was a great event, guys. And please like, subscribe, and follow me on YouTube. And I'll see you guys around.